Hello, my best viewers. This is your Elizabeth. Thank you for your support. Enjoy watching.
Two guards guarding the entrance to the Demon Lord's castle see a beautiful girl and warn her that only those who have permission to do so can enter. This did not stop Milady, and she sharply told them that although she did not have this permission, she could provide them with a subpoena. The young people were taken aback by such pressure and asked to forgive them for the resulting misunderstanding. The cute girl was Siren Folix, who came into this world just a year ago. In her first incarnation, she was a simple high school student who loved to read romantic novels and lived to be only 19 years old. Since she went to an all-girls school, she never dated boys or even held hands. In her second incarnation, she was a virgin spirit in the underworld, where she told raunchy stories to sullen priests. One of the priests once told her that she had amazing high-level energy and that he was seeing this for the first time in his existence. One day, Serene was praised by the Lord of Spirits himself and granted her life in the form of a succubus, thanks to which her hair acquired a coral silver hue and her eyes became bright purple. Being a virgin spirit, the main character wrote a novel in 2 volumes, 5,500 Shadows of the Demon Lord, which tells about the illicit affair of a girl living with the Demon Lord. In fact, because of this novel, Saren received a lawsuit. All the girl was thinking about at that time was how she would get out of this situation. The guard, as soon as he received the letter, immediately saw the handwriting in which it was written and quickly began to act. He gave the order to warn His Majesty that the author of that novel for perverts had arrived. This statement embarrassed Saren quite a lot. She wanted to fall into the ground from shame, but embarrassment quickly ceased to worry her, because upon entering the castle, she realized how much her ideas about the castle differed from reality. It seemed to her that the world of demons was not very different from the modern world of the 21st century. The castle looked like a film set for a film where several styles of architecture came together at once. Her thoughts did not stop only at the beauty of the castle, but also at the rumors floating around about the beauty of the Demon Lord. Passing by the mirror, she involuntarily looked into it, trying to imagine how to behave when they were introduced to each other, because the Demon Lord, having appeared 7 years ago, turned the tide of the then ongoing war, and in Siren's opinion should have not only a brilliant mind, but an amazing body. The flow of her thoughts was interrupted by the greeting of His Majesty, Claude Stern, entering the room. In response to this greeting, the large hall doors opened and a dark silhouette of a man appeared behind them. Realizing that this was the Demon Lord himself, Siren bowed her head in front of him, obeying the customs of this world. Not daring to raise her head, she heard a firm and calm statement that they had already met with him once. The guards who had been leading her all this time simultaneously raised their spears, blocking her path, causing a deafening clang of metal on metal to be heard throughout the hall. Still looking down at the Lord's boots, Siren heard an order to raise her head. She was very afraid to see the ruler's face, which is why, after only a few painful seconds, she decided to raise her head. A handsome, dark-haired young man appeared before her. She could not believe that he was the Demon Lord. His piercing gaze said much more than himself, because all he said was about what she called him once, in their first meeting. Saren absolutely did not understand what incident Claude was talking about, and realizing this, the Demon Lord decided to remind her about it. Unlucky bastard! That's what she called the Demon Lord the first time they met. A week earlier, Serene was lying peacefully on a bench in the park, sipping a wonderful tasting wine. She heard the sounds of footsteps approaching the place where she was, and decided to open her eyes and look at the intruder. A young man appeared before her eyes, whose well-fitting uniform involuntarily drove her crazy. The stranger stared at her so intently, which quite confused the girl. Getting up and finally sitting down on the bench, she thought about how tiring it was to be a beauty, because the uninvited guest was not the first to stare at her. And the flow of her drunken thoughts led to the quite logical conclusion, in Saren's opinion, that the stranger had fallen in love with her, which she told him about. In response to this phrase, the thoughts of the ruler, looking straight at her, rushed from assessing the condition of this lady to what she was even talking about. All that the ruler saw in front of him was a jelly-like body, located right on a bench in a crowded place, and all he wanted was to order the guards to remove him to the appropriate place. But realizing that he still needed to answer something, he said that he had no idea what she was talking about, and that she could continue to sleep peacefully. Then his gaze fell on the very place where she was lying, because after sitting down on the bench, it turned out that the girl was lying on her own book. Having seen the book, I decided to ask what kind of strange book it was, on which one could so easily fall asleep. Realizing that the stranger was looking at her novel, Siren decided to check where it was after all, and without taking her eyes off the guest, she fumbled with her hand for the book near her. The girl began to talk about how it was a novel written in 2 volumes, clearly proud that a stranger was interested in her work. He approached her with a sharp step, quickly grabbed the subject of discussion, and began to twirl it in his hand with interest. After he made sure that this was exactly the novel he was thinking about, the bishop decided to ask caustically whether it described stupid relationships. At this remark, Siren quickly stood up from the bench and, with growing indignation, decided to ask again whether she had heard what was said correctly. The Lord said that this was a rather funny book, and there was no need to react like that about it. But Siren's indignation knew no bounds. Her heart was beating wildly because they had touched her most intimately, and having already completely sobered up, she decided to put the offender in his place, saying that she was the author of this book. She added that the uninvited guest did not dare to speak like that, since most likely he had never even held a woman's hand, which would have hurt his opponent. But this did not stop the ruler, and he decided to invite her to do something more useful than writing boring novels, which angered the girl even more. After all his statements, he declared that he had no time to waste time on stupid arguments and hurried away. And at that very moment, when the stranger began to move away, Siren called the demon lord himself an unlucky bastard, and still couldn't understand what was wrong with this guy that he could so easily humiliate a girl he didn't know. This last statement had the greatest effect, as it sank into his very heart. Leaving with an imperturbable look, he only told her that since she did not know who he was, then the wise ruler would tell her and would not leave her unpunished. Remembering that incident, Siren, standing under the security guards, understood that she was completely in trouble and would no longer be able to go unpunished. The Lord standing in front of her knew about her past incarnation as a virgin spirit and pointed out to her how arrogant it was for her to make fun of him based on his past experience with succubi. His Majesty turned to an elderly man standing at a distance and said that it would be a good idea to ban all books that spread deliberately false information about his person. All Siren could think about at that moment was that there was no false information about His Highness in her novel. The elderly man turned out to be the head of the royal library. He opened her novel and began to explain to her that the events described in the book are very controversial. Seeing that she really screwed up big time, all she can wait for is a death sentence, because the accuser is himself a demon lord. Secretly, she hoped that her book would simply be removed from sale, and all profits received from sales would be taken away. In the hope of mitigating the death sentence, she said that it was an innocent joke. Claude Stern closed his eyes, exhaled resignedly, calmed his thoughts, and calmly said that he did not think so, after which he opened his eyes and looked piercingly at Siren, who was pretending to be all innocence. She was very frightened by this look. It was so heavy that she felt uneasy, but she continued to control herself. The demon lord did something completely unexpected for everyone in the hall. He touched the clip on his tie, causing the gem in the clip to sparkle with a bright purple glow, and the Lord said that there would be no trial. He added to his oath that the book would be banned as long as it contained false information about him. An oath on a gemstone, which, like the heart of the demon itself, is the source of all his powers, means that this oath cannot be broken. Violation of this obligation will lead to the death of the one taking the oath. The chief librarian became seriously nervous from such statements, because all the demons who read this book would also be punished, which is what he decided to warn the ruler about. The book was a bestseller in the demon world and was read by more than half the population. His Majesty only had one of the many copies. The guards were taken aback by the popularity of the novel and looked puzzled at Siren, who was still standing behind them. She was calmed by the thought that half of the demons in this world would serve their punishment for reading the book just like her. The head librarian decided that he could help in the current situation and suggested a different way to solve the problem than punishing half of the demon world. The guards slowly walked away behind Sirin so that she did not even notice it, because she was very carried away by the conversation of the elderly man. The librarian said that they must make sure that everything that was written in this book became true. There was enough time for this, because decisions in the demon world took place after 444 days. This greatly strained the demon lord, but the royal librarian still continued that according to the laws of the demon world, if at least half of what is written in a book is true, then it does not fall under the dissemination of false information. Sirin still did not understand what the librarian was leading to and looked at the demon lord with a question. And then the elderly man brought his story to an end, concluding that within the specified period, His Majesty would have to prove that at least half of what was written was true. The girl, still not understanding that this was about her too, was secretly glad that the ruler would have to answer for his words. But her joyful expression did not escape the librarian's gaze. He realized that she still did not understand what was in store for her. The elderly man approached her and very calmly informed her that she would also have to work hard to make half of the book true, because the story in it was told in the first person. And then the girl understood everything, realized everything, and began to remember what frank scenes she described in her book. 5,500 Shadows of the Demon Lord was an erotic novel, and since the Lord himself was himself in the book, she was to become the main character. Her thoughts could not be stopped. She could not believe that she would have to play this role, because otherwise all her beloved readers would go to prison. All her anger and all her indignation were directed at one object, the Demon Lord, who so thoughtlessly swore on the stone. At the same time, Claude asked the librarian what would happen if he just killed the author of the novel now, to which the elder assured him that then the bishop himself would die. The girl only dreamed that the citizens of this world would know how cruel their king really is, that he is capable of killing an innocent person so cold-bloodedly. Her thoughts were calmed by the fact that the trial could only begin from the day of her death, and before that there were 444 days left. The Demon Lord took his copy of the novel and, using magic, wanted to return it to its original place among the other books. At the same time, the guards in the hall announced the arrival of the Demon Queen. Saren involuntarily turned around to look at the entering figure. From the first seconds, she was fascinated by the beauty and grace of the queen, whose name was Valaria Etera. King Claude turned to Valaria and calmly asked why she was here. To this question, the beautiful queen covered her face with a fan and with the most graceful air said how embarrassed she was by the question asked. The bishop lowered his eyes in embarrassment, apparently not even thinking that his question was so inappropriate for a lady. He quickly pulled himself together and ordered everyone to leave, everyone except the head royal librarian. The queen gave the order to the maid to leave the box, after which the maid Rosalie hastily left the room. When all the strangers left, Claude decided to clarify what had confused Valaria. The king's displeased appearance only made the queen laugh, and she playfully told him to try to understand her, and, if he so desired, he could be a queen himself. Sirin, whom everyone had forgotten a little about, was taken aback by such a conversation, and involuntarily began to listen to him more and more. It was a discovery for her that the king and queen play the roles of spouses only in public. It was as if the veil of this secret family had been lifted for her, because in the eyes of everyone, the demon king who abolished slavery was prudent and kind-hearted, but without an audience, he treated those around him rather rudely. The queen was kind and sweet in public than alone with her husband, without prying eyes, where she seemed like a cruel and serious lady, and then a quick, cold look from the queen interrupted all Saren's thoughts. Valaria ran up to the girl with lightning speed, grabbed her by both hands, and very loudly asked to forgive the author of the novel for her rudeness. Siren was taken aback by such an outburst, but out of the corner of her eye she noticed that the king grinned at the queen's actions and wondered if they were really spouses, more like brother and sister, holding the hands of the author of the novel. Vilaria turned to the librarian with a request to explain what happened here. Paul Segan, who is also a librarian, began to tell the queen what had happened, puzzled. She listened attentively without interrupting or asking unnecessary questions. She did not doubt the veracity of what was said. Continuing to listen to the story of what happened, the queen clenched her teeth more and more. Anger was clearly growing rapidly within her, which Saren, who had been watching her all this time, clearly noticed. Having listened to the whole story to the end, Vilaria attacked Claude with all her rage, because how dare he bother her favorite author? Is it really because the queen reads her books every day before going to bed? The girl was pleasantly surprised by such circumstances. She never expected that the Queen of Demons herself was an ardent fan of her novel. But Claude was not persuaded, and calmly said that he had expressed himself clearly, and the queen needed to comply with his demands. Hearing this, Siren's fantasy began to sparkle with wild colors. She began to think that the king and queen had some secret games, violation of the rules of which would result in sexual punishment. While the author of the erotic novel was carried away by her love fantasy, Vilaria and Claude argued that the queen should study before going to bed about state affairs, rather than read novels. Siren even began to salivate when the arguers finally noticed her. The queen was very concerned about the author's condition. She was so interested in the unfinished ending of the novel that she was ready to argue with the king for as long as she wanted, if only Serene could finish it. Vilaria took her beloved author by the hands with all admiration, at the same time praising her works and admiring that fate allowed them to meet in such circumstances. The queen also did not ignore her unceremonious husband and gave him the cruelest look of her life. She remembered that a copy of the book was in her bedroom, which means Claude went into her bedchamber and took the novel without permission, and also looked through it in secret. Siren was embarrassed that she was witnessing a conversation from which it turns out that the king and queen even sleep in different beds. But Vilaria, looking at her, thought about how she could profitably use this new acquaintance in her life. Queen Vilaria Atara, before the war, was the Princess of Atara, a powerful noble family of the Empire of Light. She was also a big fan of Serene Follix's work, so much so that she followed her on social networks. And then a glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes that the king would fall in love with the author of the novel. Vilaria herself would be overthrown, and she would be able to return to her kingdom. Miss Follix looked at the sly expression on the queen's face when she suddenly grabbed her hand. The lady rushed with her to the box left by the maid by order of the queen and began to take books out of it, asking her to sign them especially for her. The queen was sorting through a box full of books of the same novel, but she was looking for a specific one. Seeing Claude's favorite rare copy in his hands, she quickly snatched it and decided that the autograph should be in this book. This book was printed in only 2 copies for the most devoted readers. The first was with the author himself, and the second was with Queen Vilaria. Siren immediately understood how her limited edition book ended up with the Demon Lord. She again unwittingly became a listener to a personal conversation between the king and queen, where the ruler displeasedly asked why Vilaria told him that, in principle, there were only 2 books, to which she replied that she meant only a limited edition. The girl had an insight that this whole lawsuit, and in general the whole situation, happened because the king wanted to punish the queen in this way for work not completed on time. It was clear from the Demon Lord that he was pretty bored with this fuss with books, and he wearily grabbed his head. Siren continued to build a chain of insight that she had simply become a victim in a dispute between the spouses. But even despite this, she could not help but sign the book for her most devoted fan. Queen Vilaria was so happy with the autograph that she completely forgot about her recent anger at her husband. After the happiness she had experienced, Milady asked Miss Follix in a calm voice that if she did not mind, the queen would like to take the chair and table at which the author was sitting to make it a family heirloom in Itar. She immediately sprang into action, ordering the maids to wrap the items in tape. While everyone was busy with their own affairs, the Demon Lord involuntarily remembered the scene from the book where the main character's hands are tied with ribbons, and asked Siren what it meant. Confused by the question, the girl did not understand why the king asked such a question. Did he really not know what it meant? Lady Valaria decided to explain to Cyrene that Claude sincerely did not understand what he was talking about, and with all his naivety, he decided to ask her directly about it. In the demonic world, there are only two ways for demons to appear: the natural path or incarnation, that is, the rebirth of the soul. Since in the demonic world there is no concept of age, demons are immediately born as adults. So the demon lord appeared in the southern region of the Night Empire 7 years ago, at the age of approximately 25 years. The queen continued her story about the king, that he did not know about love and relationships, since immediately after the war, he immersed himself in work. The overlord was more interested in becoming the supreme emperor than in finding love, so the queen quickly ended her attempts to capture his heart. Trying to smooth over the situation with the heartless king, Viaria noted his handsome face, capable of hiding all his flaws in his soul. Siren took a closer look at the demon lord, and indeed noticed that he had quite captivating facial features, and his slightly frowning gaze gave him a rough yet sensual appearance. The girl was perplexed why the queen, his legal wife, was telling her all the details. But then the queen brought her speech to the end and declared that it was the author who could teach love to the king, who understood nothing about love affairs. The main character understood that she herself also had no experience in love relationships. Love, the concept of the relationship between a man and a woman, was in no way connected in her head with the king and her. The demon lord, outraged by the queen's decision, pointed his finger at Siren and stated that because of her, he could not concentrate on work for a whole week, and it would be better if he did not see her face anymore. Valaria could no longer be stopped, and she began to put pressure on the mistake made earlier, because the king did not want half of his subjects to become criminals. Siren no longer saw any other choice but to agree with the queen in everything. She kept thinking that the whole novel was built on passionate desires, and forcing the king to do so could lead to tears. But in her dreams, even with tears, he looked delightful. The girl tried to quickly push away lustful thoughts about the demon lord. The queen, still ardent, decided to clarify with Paul that the final verdict would be based on the veracity of the entire book, to which the librarian gave an affirmative answer. Valaria meticulously gave arguments for a long time in order to completely convince everyone present of the need to make the book truthful, even though everyone had already understood this long ago. The girl thought that she obviously would not be able to bring all the scenes from the book to life, and hoped that by writing a more restrained epilogue, she would be able to bear everything more calmly. But the queen convinced her that this would completely change the mood of the book. Then Siren decided to write several more volumes of her novel, so that from the 4 volumes she could choose more harmless scenes to embody. This could not but please the queen, and she could not hide her joy from others. Watching the king read her novel, Siren hoped that her editor would understand and would be willing to continue the novel instead of writing an epilogue. Stopping in the middle of the page, the bishop suddenly asked who Simeon was, to which he received the answer that Simeon was the main character of the book. The next name interested him no less. Irene turned out to be the main character of the novel, which was Siren's name in her first incarnation. His Majesty pointed out that the author specifically wrote her human name so that no one would understand that this was her work. But Miss Follix replied that in the novel, the main characters communicate informally, despite the different status of their position. This taunt was smoothed over by the queen, who said that His Majesty was gracious enough to forgive the author for this rudeness. The demon lord continued to glare at the slightly impudent Serene. After some time, the girl received a contract to translate into reality the contents of the book of 5,500 Shadows of the Demon Lord. It also stated that she was now the chief royal author. The queen was undisguisedly delighted with this idea, because by doing so, she facilitated Siren's move to the castle, and accordingly, everything that would happen between her and the king would remain a secret. The king, in turn, again swore on his gem that he would try his best to fulfill the terms of the contract. Unexpectedly for him, the girl extended her hand to him for a handshake to seal their contract, and smiled sweetly at him. He jumped out of his seat and began to quickly move away to find a suitable room for her. But deep down in his soul, everything began to tremble from Siren's smile. The author stood there, holding out her hand for a handshake, wondering what happened. Left alone, Claude snapped his fingers, and in the blink of an eye, that very novel appeared in front of him. He sat down more comfortably and decided to read the book and understand what it was about him that captivated his queen so much. The king looked wearily at the pages. The strange events of that day made themselves felt. After reading the novel, he drew up a schedule for completing all scenes of 30 lines for just a month. Calling the guard, the Lord gave him the list and ordered him to take it to the royal author, at the same time thinking about how easy it would be to do it in a month if he did a line a day. Although he was not delighted with the kisses and hugs in the book. Finally, he was able to sit down and relax after a hard day, but the book did not leave his thoughts. Having once said that this was a boring book, but now he considered it quite intriguing, and with an interesting emotional component, the king could not believe that such a novel could be written by a virgin spirit. He was especially interested in one sentence where the heroine was asked if she liked the demon lord. Realizing that he was not in a position to reread such a novel, he drove away all thoughts about the characters in the book. In the mansion, after a hard day, Siren was relaxing, lounging on a large, soft bed and cursing the Lord for giving her a mansion that was not cleaned and covered in dust. Suddenly, her indignation was interrupted by a loud knock on the door, but she did not hear a voice asking her to enter. Rising up on the bed, the author saw that someone had thrown a letter to her under the door. Strong curiosity prompted her to quickly unpack the letter, which contained a schedule for the execution of scenes from the novel. Siren regretted seeing this letter 1,000,000 times, because the king decided to complete the plan in a month and even scheduled some scenes for today. She couldn't believe her eyes, and she didn't want to believe it. Knowing her book inside and out, she understood that today she would need to spend this night with the demon lord. The girl immediately rushed to the king for clarification, not understanding why he chose these particular scenes. She wanted to find Claude as quickly as possible and cancel this impossible 30-day plan. Heading to the king's chambers, she involuntarily thought about why he chose precisely the most tactile scenes from the entire plot, where it took 2 or 3 lines to describe the positions of the hands alone, and where the explicit scenes were much longer than the non-explicit ones. Having burst into his chambers without an invitation, Siren began to be indignant, but she froze in surprise. Due to deep shock, the object of indignation accidentally fell out of her hands, but she did not even notice it. An almost completely naked ruler appeared before her eyes, standing with his back to her, from which she could not take her eyes off. Hearing strange sounds coming from behind him, Claude turned around and looked softly at the girl. All Siren's thoughts returned to the queen's words about the Lord's beautiful facial features in order to somehow stop looking at his body. But it didn't work out well for her, because his back was no longer turned to her, and she was able to see all the attractiveness of his body, which the queen had kept silent about. The king continued to look at her questioningly, waiting for at least some explanation. But without waiting for even the slightest sound, he asked that shouldn't she close her eyes in such cases, and not just stand and devour him with her gaze. Siren finally realized how stupid she looked, and that she really shouldn't have looked at him like that without embarrassment. But she could only say a simple goodbye. She still continued to look at the king, thinking that usually during bathing there are quite a lot of servants next to the king to help him, so why does he do everything himself? The Lord interrupted their awkward silence, saying that she probably couldn't wait for the night. The author was able to tear her gaze away from the Lord's body only after she realized what he had just said, and the colors of embarrassment appeared on her face. Continuing his pressure, Claude said that he had not imagined that she would be the first to come to him, and in order to completely embarrass her, he added that apparently she was very unbearable. His words had an effect, because her face was completely red, and she began to try to convince him that she had not come there for this at all. The Lord continued casually that in this case, her problem must be solved as soon as possible. The unsuspecting girl only managed to look into his eyes with bewilderment on her face. Bright sparks flew around her, and a second later she and the Lord moved into the bedroom. Magic gently laid the numb Siren on a spacious and soft bed. The girl did not dare to open her eyes. After she felt that she was lying on something soft, she finally opened her eyes and saw the Lord above her, who told her to close her eyes again. He would do everything quickly. The girl was not ready for such a rapid development of events and asked Claude to stop. To this objection, he only affectionately began to take off her shoes, and then Siren realized that she had no choice. The king decided to remind her that they both agreed to fulfill the contract and suggested only turning off the lights. She, of course, meant the choice of scenes to implement and not the choice of speed of execution of the contract. The Lord, looking at her, smirked smugly and hinted that she probably had to have a reason for coming to him at such a late hour. Hanging over her, he assumed that he knew why she burst into him like that, because he had already read her book. Siren couldn't take her eyes off his beautiful body. She didn't even hear him. Her thoughts hovered between the muscles of his sculpted abs. Snapping his fingers, Claude turned off the light, which created a captivating twilight around him. He addressed her by the name of the main character of the book and tenderly extended his hand to her face. Siren flinched at the touch to her cheek, but did not pull his hand away. In the light of the moon, she saw his face smoothly approaching her, saw his eyes looking tenderly at her. The girl's thoughts ran through the queen's words that the king did not understand love affairs. But in reality, the situation was completely different. Realizing that he was trying to kiss her, she pushed him away and asked if he had really learned everything in the book. Confused, Claude calmly and peacefully answered her in the affirmative, so he knew what and how to do. The girl was delighted with such great progress in such a short time. She was inspired that her book contributed to this. The silence dragged on, and to diffuse the situation, Siren clapped her hands and asked if the Lord had eaten anything today. He approached her again, looking straight into her eyes, and continued to remain silent, clearly hinting that she was not thinking about that right now. But Siren continued to say that she would prefer something sweet. She once heard that it was very important for demons to eat something sweet before going to bed. Addressing her as Irene again, he was still trying to recreate at least one scene from the book. Claude was getting closer and closer. Her heart began to pound wildly with excitement, as if it was about to jump out of her chest. Leaning close to her ear, he gently and affectionately asked her if she was really so afraid of him. Blushing more and more every minute, Siren decided to fight back and said that in this form, no one would be afraid of him. But the Lord continued to gently say that he was ready to eat her like candy. Looking into his eyes, she didn't understand where the impudent and rude king she saw during the day had gone to. Claude interrupted her thoughts, saying that he wanted to hug her right now. The statement stunned her, and the girl began to try to get out of the situation, muttering that she was not ready yet and would not do this with someone who did not have a place in his heart for her. The bishop continued by asking her if she had a place in her heart for him. Out of extreme excitement, Siren, without thinking, blurted out that not yet, but his voice and stunning body told her to open her heart, and realizing what she had just said, she sharply covered her mouth with her hand. This answer satisfied Claude's curiosity. He smiled again with all tenderness. Moving away from her, he continued to enjoy her embarrassment and continued to ask if she had finished her chatter. Realizing that her words had no effect, she began to agree with him. The Lord took her by surprise, saying that it turned out that they had played out one of the planned scenes. They repeated a few lines of dialogue as his gem began to glow. The Lord initially enchanted his stone so that each completed scene would be marked with a bright glow. The king continued to say that they had completed the task, but Siren had mixed feelings. She completely forgot that all those phrases that Claude said were written by her in the novel. Crying with relief, she vaguely realized that there was no need to answer the ruler's questions so stupidly. Her relaxation was interrupted by the king's phrase, where he jokingly clarified that she didn't hope that he would really hug her. Siren clearly did not expect this, which she informed the king about, but he only noticed that all this time she had not taken her eyes off his body, and the girl asked him to get dressed quickly. Moving away from her, Claude quoted a line from the book she had written, which said that making love is the best cure for depression. All the social media posts in which she had actually said such things flashed through her mind. Having regained control, she began to ask the ruler to get dressed as soon as possible so that no one would misunderstand them, and in general she did not consider his body attractive. But his soul said the opposite. What was said was received by the king with misunderstanding. He decided to clarify that she was talking about actions that could be misunderstood, but at the same time, whether she realized that this was necessary for the implementation of the plan. Startled, she looked away from the speaker and realized the stupidity of her thoughts. Then the ruler decided to understand how she was going to carry out her plans if she was not ready to do anything with someone for whom she had no feelings, which completely angered the girl. She replied that she didn't really not want to, but was simply not eager. Then the king began to parade her, angering her even more. The girl thought again about how cruel he was and that he really deserved to be a demon lord because he irritated her so much. Suddenly, she remembered about that very list and why she ran to the ruler's chambers, pointed at him with her hand, and asked why he chose such explicit scenes, especially the last ones, which made her blush just from reading them. Serene still didn't understand how it was possible that the king, after reading one book, was able to understand romance so quickly, and also made a plan that only he himself was delighted with. A paper appeared in front of his face, behind which an indignant Miss Follix was hiding, shouting that they could not meet the schedule because she had no feelings for him. The lord closed his eyes, sighed doomedly, and said that no one's feelings now worry him as much as time. After a few moments, he scratched the back of his head and suggested that they should spend their nights together. No longer surprised by anything, Siren decided to clarify that they should spend all nights during the month together. Claude asked what she didn't like, that the act would last all night, or that it would happen to him, to which the girl answered in the affirmative to both options. Seeing that she wanted to ask him for something, the king firmly said that he had already given her the title of royal author, and she did not dare ask him for anything. The writer nevertheless decided to try her luck, and asked to wait until she wrote the remaining parts, while the king would adjust the schedule. The tired lord agreed to her terms, and gave her 3 months to write the books, and later he would send her a revised schedule. Having achieved her goal, Siren happily clenched her fist and exclaimed that she would try her best. The next day, the girl slept, and then put things in order in her new home. She tried to draw water from the only well that stood nearby, but the pump did not give in to her. The enraged Miss Follix hit the iron pump with all her might, burning with indignation. Completely exhausted, the writer did not understand why she had to stay in the palace and how long it would take. Memories of the previous day did not leave her thoughts. The unwillingness to believe in everything that was happening was devouring her from the inside. She decided that even if she turned the book into reality, Queen Valaria would not let her leave the palace so easily. When the girl reached the point where water began to drip from the well, she was struck by the realization that she would have to remain forever a royal author. Since this was the case, she decided to try to enter the Royal Academy in order to get some benefit from what happened. The Royal Academy is the only educational institution on the borders of the empires of Light and Night. In order to get there, you need to pass the entrance exams to the highest score, but you can also pass if someone writes a letter of recommendation, someone like the Demon Lord himself. An unfamiliar knight in black armor burst into her solitude and bowed respectfully. His name was Corin. He was the shadow commander of His Majesty's army and the right hand of King Claude. The girl examined her new acquaintance questioningly, trying to guess what face was hidden behind his helmet. Corin lightly pressed the lever of the well, and clean, clear water flowed out of it, after which he took out a small red box tied with a ribbon, handed it to the girl, and said that it was a gift from the king. No longer knowing what to expect from the lord, Siren slowly pulled the ribbon, unpacking the gift. The box contained a schedule for the day, and a beautiful black dress with a cutout, exactly the same as she described in her novel. The schedule included one of the scenes called A Secret Meeting After the Royal Banquet at 16 o'clock. The girl could not help but be pleased that the king changed some scenes, but knowing himself, they were also quite hot. While she was looking at the gifts, the shadow rabbit disappeared without a trace in a puff of black smoke. Returning to the mansion, the writer began to examine the donated dress and was surprised at how attentive the bishop was to little things. She thought that if not for his bad character, she would have attacked him long ago. The girl's peace was disturbed by King Claude, who appeared out of nowhere. With loud indignation, he urged her to get ready quickly because there was no time left. The girl was very frightened. I didn't understand where the ruler had come from and screamed loudly. After recovering from her shock, Serene looked at the king and pointed out to him that he had entered without knocking. It was already 15 hours and 40 minutes on the clock, which meant there were only 20 minutes left before the start of the scene, and Claude tried to hurry the girl to get ready. Realizing that Miss Folix was in no hurry to get ready, he snapped his fingers, and the dress itself appeared on her. She looked chic in a black dress and red heels, which could not help but attract the attention of the ruler. Siren admired not only herself, but also the power of Claude's magic, capable of fulfilling her plans so easily and quickly. The dress fit her perfectly. The open back added sensuality to her look, and the deep cutout in the front added frankness. The king's gaze of admiration did not escape her, and she hinted to him that he was looking at her too closely. The girl remembered that in this scene she had to say that she loved him while he drank white wine. Then he tore her dress, and that was the end of the scene. Taking the book in her hands to clarify the details, she read that the main male character of the novel should unbutton his shirt and take off his tie. The king calmly asked if she wanted him to remain completely naked. Without thinking for a long time, he took off his dress jacket and abruptly threw it onto a nearby chair. Claude quickly grabbed his tie and also zealously pulled it down, throwing it after his jacket. Siren was captivated by such a spectacle because the demon lord himself took off his clothes at her first word. Gradually, the king began to unbutton his snow-white shirt, one button after another, feeling a piercing gaze on him. He raised his eyes to look at his companion. She tried to hide her enormous interest by hiding her face behind her hands, but curiosity took over. Siren still spied on Claude's undressing. Noticing this, the king tried to find out why she was making an attempt to hide her interest if she was still giving herself away, but all her thoughts were about how hot the demon lord was. Having completely unbuttoned his shirt, he began to roll up the sleeves that were in his way, revealing his strong, muscular arms. The colors rose to her cheeks again, just like last night. In her heart, she cursed herself for not describing the naked main character, and therefore Claude only unbuttoned and did not completely remove his shirt. The demon lord finished undressing, plopped down on the bed, and commanded her to do so in an authoritative tone. Her heart beat nervously. Despite her excitement, Siren answered the king in the affirmative. She realized that she could not bear his gaze and tried not to look into his eyes in order to calm her heart. The king reminded her that only time was of paramount importance now, hinting that she should hurry up. Siren continued to collect her thoughts, trying to prepare herself for the cherished words. But the lump in her throat did not allow her to say a sound. Having mastered her emotions, she told the king with all sincerity that she loved him. The king lay as satisfied as possible with the scene she had played, so much so that a grin appeared on his face again. Vladika decided to defuse the tense situation and answered her that he did not love her. The answer was not at all according to the script. Indignant, Siren began to scold the king for rushing her, and he was not even in a hurry to play out his text. Seeing his mocking expression on his face, the girl again began to get irritated by this whole idea. His companion again began to say that she loved him, restoring the lost moment, but more timidly. The king was amused by this timidity in her words and said that he did not believe in her acting. This angered Siren even more, and she asked him to just follow the script. The girl was angry at how the king treated his own role. She overcame herself and her emotions and said the cherished words, and the ruler still mocked her. The king's amusement continued for quite a long time, thereby irritating Miss Folix more. Finally, she uttered the cherished words so that the king believed in their sincerity, and he answered her in kind. 2 glasses of white wine appeared out of thin air in the lord's hands, one of which he handed to Serene. Taking one of the glasses, the girl drank a little of the excellent wine poured into it. Following her example, the demon lord also tried the captivating drink. He removed the glass from his hands, and at the same moment, Siren felt the ruler's hot hand on her body. She sipped the wine slowly, realizing how quickly the alcohol had intoxicated her mind. Claude didn't waste any time, and with a powerful gust of his hands tore the bottom of Siren's dress. As soon as he did this, the stone shone with a purple light, announcing that the scene had actually been played out. The intoxicated girl only heard that such a pose was not in the scene, and asked, not understandingly, what pose we were talking about. She didn't notice how she gradually climbed over the young ruler and practically clung to him. The writer didn't even think about stopping, and concluded that they didn't have to follow the script from the book. Claude was amazed at how quickly she became drunk after drinking just one glass of wine, and asked if she had gone crazy. The wine brought out the playfulness in Serene, and she began answering questions with questions, curling her hair more and more on her finger. The sudden change in her mood at first frightened the ruler, but the playfulness that came and the sexy girl hanging over him made him blush. She gently extended her hand to his heated shoulder, the warmth of which penetrated even through his shirt. Siren's drunken eyes spoke for her. She could not control herself and was ready to attack Claude. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, the king decided to try to calm her down by asking what she wanted to achieve with this. But she was interested in something completely different: why he was doing this to her. And since he didn't like her at all, why did he make such a terrible oath on the stone? Not wanting to answer the questions, the bishop grabbed the writer by the waist and pulled her towards him. The girl continued to ask questions, in a calmer and quieter tone, about why he was doing this to her if he was not angry or annoyed. Recoiling from his ear, she defiantly declared that he could not know everything, because he had only been in this world for 7 years, and with that, everything was decided for her. Claude reached out his hand to her face, but she fixed her gaze on his lips, thinking about how she wanted to bite into them. His hand covered Siren's eyes, and unlike his heated shoulder, his palm was terribly cold. The Lord reached for his hand, and as if reading the girl's thoughts, he passionately pressed his lips to hers. This is what they both wanted, and continued the kiss for quite a long time, until Claude decided to interrupt their connection. He reluctantly pulled away from her, knowing that they were pressed for time, and his meeting with Coron would soon take place. Not expecting this from the king, who, in the queen's opinion, was far from love affairs, Siren asked with interest why he kissed her. The Lord responded by noticing that she still kept her hand on his back, as if reluctant to move away from him. The girl liked to be so close to Claude, to feel the warmth of his body with her body, which she told him about. The king's face showed deep bewilderment. All this was new to him. She gently touched his face, telling him that he had a beautiful back and a magnificent, seductive voice. At the end of her monologue about the Lord's beauty, Siren ended by calling him a charmer. Their time was up. The clock struck 5 o'clock, and the ruler called his servant Coron. A knight emerged from the black fog and uttered a long-honed greeting. The knight looked at the king, on whose shoulder his companion lay peacefully, to which Claude asked to pretend that Coron did not see this, and called someone for help. The shadow commander disappeared as quickly as he appeared in his black fog. The king tried to revive Serene, seeing that she was ready to fall asleep right in his bedroom. She herself confirmed his guesses, saying that she wanted to take a nap in this very room. All the Lord could do was put his hand on her head on his shoulder, so that she could take a peaceful nap while the commander looked for help. She enjoyed being in his arms and how he peacefully stroked her hair. The relaxed girl asked the king what she would receive at the end of today's schedule. The Lord froze for a moment at the unexpected question. He asked if she had any ideas on this matter. Serene moved her head a little so that she could see his face and asked him to write her a letter of recommendation for admission to the academy. Puzzled, Claude advised her not to make hasty decisions about admission. She reminded him that it was his fault that what was happening between them now, and the academy was a small price to pay for all her efforts. He continued to play with her and asked what he would get for putting his signature on the letter of recommendation. The girl offered him her daily kisses, to which Claude decided that they were completely crazy. A feather quickly materialized in his hand. He raised his hand to his face, making a thoughtful appearance. He placed his hand on the part of the girl's back that was not covered by the dress, wondering where he should leave his signature. Deciding that the open area would be suitable for this, he gently began to move the pen along her back, writing out his initials. The girl made a loud noise, as if it was causing her a burning pain in her back. The king was very afraid for her, and politely asked if she was in pain, but did not stop what he was doing. When Siren replied that the pain was bearable, a dark knight suddenly appeared from the fog. He brought with him a friend of the author, whose name was Dylan Aldebaran, and he greeted his majesty courteously. Raising his head after the greeting, the friend saw something he never expected to see. Siren lay unconscious in the arms of the demon lord, leaning her head on his shoulder. Dylan was not only a friend of Miss Follick's, but also the editor-in-chief of the demon publishing house, which published her books. The lord raised one eyebrow, looking Mr. Aldebaran up and down. Claude found out if Dylan knew what to do with the immobilized girl, to which her friend replied that this was not the first time, and he tearfully begged her never to drink too much again. Siren was in a fog. Not noticing anything around, the king assumed that it was like a curse. Trying to calm the king, Mr. Aldebaran said that the writer would not even remember anything when she woke up in the morning. He asked the lord to cast a sleeping spell on Siren in order to calmly carry her to the bedroom. The demon lord only smiled mysteriously and fulfilled his friend's request, saying that this time she would remember everything. The rays of the sun fell on Miss Follicks's bed, causing her to quickly wake up, yawn loudly, and look around. She was in her mansion, getting out of bed. She accidentally stepped on Dylan lying on the floor. Picking up her friend from the floor, she began to shake him intensively, at the same time finding out what had happened to him. The guy woke up, feeling a severe headache caused by a sudden awakening. Trying to cope with the unbearable pain, Dylan began to read Siren's moral that she should not drink alcohol. He continued to say that this had happened many times before, and she didn't remember each of them. Yesterday, her friend was visited by a shadow commander who asked him for help with her. Everyone was surprised that the writer was passed out. The girl didn't particularly like talking about her little mistake, especially since drinking wine was written into the script. But her friend continued the story in every detail of how she lay unconscious on top of the half-naked demon lord. She hoped that he had made it all up so that she would never drink alcohol again. But Dylan explained to her that Corin had also told him everything, from the accusations of slander to the daily schedule. Remembering what she did last night, she wanted to just go out the window. But even such a statement did not stop his story. He continued that Siren had clearly kissed the ruler, but he and Corin did not know what happened next. The confused girl reasoned that most likely the king would put her in prison for such an act. Dylan interrupted her anxiety by saying that the lord looked at her with a look that did not say that he did not like it. A friend handed her a bottle of a drink that would help her get rid of a painful hangover in the morning. All this time, Siren did not notice how thirsty she was all the time, so she drank the entire jar in one gulp. After hearing everything, the girl's memories gradually began to return. Her heart began to beat wildly again, and her hair stood on end from the sharply emerging images of intimacy. Someone knocked, which eased the girl's torment. She turned towards the door and invited her to enter. Standing in the passage was Abel Cielia. He was a former baron who was spared by the demon lord himself during the war. Now he served as the commander of the water faction. The writer bowed her head as the young commander of the night entered, introduced herself, and greeted him. Mr. Celia spoke with a pleasant smile that the king warned him that Siren might do something extravagant. He asked her not to do anything, since she had received a recommendation to the academy, and she shouldn't act weird. Siren did not even suspect that the lord would fulfill his promise and write a letter to the academy for her. The sharp memory of him leaving his signature on her back involuntarily made her blush. The girl imagined that she must have lost the note on the way to the mansion, blushing at the thought that the signature was on her back. Sir Abel politely believed her words and confirmed that he was also very sorry that the paper was lost. The Blue Knight commander hurriedly left Siren's bedroom, loudly closing the door behind him. Towards evening, the author gathered her strength, dressed up, and went to apologize to the demon lord. He looked at her exhausted and asked if there was anything that required her apology. She was very happy that the king did not hold a grudge against her and did not even think about punishing her. Her joy ended quickly enough because he said that he would answer her in kind. Having finished the mockery, he sternly asked about the subject's application to the Royal Academy. Siren reminded him with a cheerful expression that the signature was left on her back, which was not exactly the right place. Handing the piece of paper to the bishop, the girl asked why he didn't sign on the piece of paper right away, but preferred her back. He explained that signing the paper was quite burdensome for him, but asked him to sign from below or from above. She decided that it was better to sign from below. Only a couple of seconds had passed from the moment Siren stood with her feet on the floor, but now she was in the hands of the Lord. Claude wanted to touch the place where his signature was still with his hand and use magic to quickly send the letter to the academy. Finding herself in his arms, the girl wondered what that choice from above or below meant. She felt his hand on her thigh, which quickly rose higher and higher. Trying to escape from his strong hands, the writer asked the king not to rush things. Claude heard her, stopped, and removed his hand from his hip, but asked what happened. Siren admitted that if she had known what the Lord asked her about, she would not have chosen the option below. Dissatisfied with being so rudely interrupted, he muttered indignantly that this too was burdensome for him. The bishop added that no matter what the writer thinks about, she still won't achieve it. The girl sincerely did not understand what he was talking about and told him about it, to which he began to act. His warm hand touched the author's right shoulder, gently touching the strap of her dress. Feeling his touch, her face turned very red, and her heart began to beat wildly again, because his fingers lowered the strap of her dress, exposing her shoulder. Siren began to explain that there was no need to remove the strap of her dress, because to get to the right place, it was enough to unfasten a couple of buttons. The bishop replied that he had not looked at the dress in such detail to understand this. Taking the girl tighter, he lifted her even higher, ending up with her thrown over his shoulder. The writer humbly asked the bishop to hurry up. At any moment, anyone could see them together. Claude gradually and steadily began to undo the buttons in the middle of the back. His movements were a little rough. Siren asked him to be more gentle, to which the Lord offered to let her go. The girl shook her head negatively. Her face strongly betrayed her feelings, but she did not want to show them to the king. Having unbuttoned all the buttons of her dress, he began to touch her delicate skin, looking for the place where he left his signature yesterday. Vladika touched more and more, deciding that he had finally found the right place. The author remembered the location. It was a little lower, which she embarrassedly reported. The king breathed languidly while his fingers gently touched her back. He deliberately took time to feel the warmth of her back longer. Having found the signature, he used magic to send it straight to the academy. Siren exhaled loudly and admitted that it was quite painful. The Lord offered to let her go. Shaking her head affirmatively, she immediately found herself on the floor, painfully hitting her tailbone. Crying from severe pain, the girl rose to her feet and looked menacingly at the back of Claude's head. All this time, Valeria stood behind the hall doors and watched everything that was happening. The bishop quickly ran to the door and opened it with a roar, scaring his wife. The only question that bothered him was how long she had been watching everything that was happening. Willia, as Claude affectionately called her, smiled playfully and pretended that she had not seen much more than she should have. Her bluff was revealed by her face, on which a cheerful grin shone, noticing which the ruler began to justify himself. Siren hurriedly fastened the buttons of her dress on the back and hurried to join the conversation. The queen thought that there was no need for the girl to be so embarrassed, but out loud, she suggested to the king that he open a portal to return the author to his mansion. A bright glow appeared under Miss Follix's feet, and she quickly began to sink into the floor. The couple watched as the writer disappeared from their field of vision, swinging her arms cheerfully. Giggling contentedly, the queen handed him the package with the report for which she had come. The king, confused, picked up the paper and asked what was making Valeria laugh so much. She tried to change the subject by asking whether His Majesty liked the girl, but he immediately saw through her plan and asked not to change the topic of conversation. Still having fun, William noticed that the king was in love with Siren, and it was no longer just a game for him. The Lord looked at her with a stern look and dryly replied that he was not interested in such things as love. When a demon fell in love, the object of his affection began to smell to him of the aroma of fresh fruit. which is exactly what the queen told him. He became lost in thought, trying to figure out what smell he smelled when he was quite close to Siren. Their first kiss surfaced in his head. It was then that he felt a sweetish smell similar to succubus peaches. His wife stated that she seemed to smell a pleasant aroma coming from the girl. Claude quickly realized that Vilya was planning to return to Atara, but he reminded her of the promise she had made to him. Vilaria remembered well that fateful day for her when she almost lost her brother. During the war, Claude Stern unexpectedly appeared, freeing demon slaves from the tyrant lords of the Empire of Light. Trying to save her brother, Beelzebub Etar, from the fate that awaited him, the queen swore on a stone to fulfill any desire of the ruler. The slave liberator wanted one thing: to become the only emperor of the demon world. At that very moment, she vowed to do everything in her power to help him fulfill his wish. By her action, she was able to save her brother from death, but he was still sent to prison. Claude told her that if she returned to Atara now, he would become the sole ruler. Her desire was to return to her home, to the castle, which became more and more deserted every year. She knew that the royal palace would not be empty without her. There were still enough people in it to take care of the king. With a new rising wave of playfulness, she decided that she would pray for the king before going to bed so that he would have enough strength for the night's work. As she left, she told him that people would become worried if the reigning monarch did not have a consort and heirs. Leaving the demon lord alone with this information, she slammed the door and hurried to her chambers. There, she was met by a maid who informed her that the bath was ready and that she would immediately bring a waterproof copy of the queen's favorite novel. Vilaria plunged into the bathroom, opened a book, but first decided to check the page of her favorite author on social networks. The queen was worried about the writer's lack of new posts. She thought that the girl did not like it in the castle, and this could interfere with the implementation of her plan upon returning to Atara. Then she decided to ask the maid to help her, since she did not want it to end with Siren escaping from the palace. The maid, Rosalia, listened to the queen's order and decided that it was better to go to serve in the royal author's mansion than to lose her head for refusing. What pleased her most was the opportunity to return with Vilaria to Atara if she fulfilled her instructions. Pleased with her cunning, the ruler's wife smiled and allowed the maid to leave her. On the other side of the palace, Miss Follix went out onto the balcony of her mansion to see who was making the strange sounds from the street. Among the treetops, she saw 3 silhouettes, namely Sir Ray Field, Commander Abel Celius, and a girl standing between them. Siren looked at them in surprise until they disappeared from view through the doorway of her mansion. After waiting only a few minutes, the girl met them in the main wide hall. Sir Rayfield was the best friend of her editor Dylan and also led the Golden Knights. A previously unknown girl came to the attention of the mistress of the house, and she began to examine her in surprise. Ray deigned to kindly introduce the guest, saying that the girl's name was Rosalia, and she was sent to Siren by the generous queen. The maid was very happy to begin serving her new mistress. The writer had not seen such enthusiasm for quite a long time. The girl had never had her own personal servant. It came as a shock to her that she could command someone. She thought that this was an overly broad gesture on Vilaria's part, but Rosalia was ready to start from that very moment. Deciding that there was nothing to do, Miss Follix asked the maid to show her around the castle the next day. Having said this, she saw how everyone present changed their faces. Sir Field decided to clarify whether she really didn't know what day it was tomorrow. She really was not aware that the entrance ceremony to the Royal Academy was supposed to take place the next day. Ray told her that the committee rejected more than half of the applications based on exam results alone. Abel assured her that with a letter of recommendation from the Demon Lord himself, she would enroll despite her low scores. Before the arrival of the king, the academy was in a very deplorable state, but thanks to the reforms carried out, it blossomed before our eyes. Sir Ray Field and Commander Abel Celia were graduates of the academy when it consisted of only one building. The captain of the Golden Knights was also one of the professors at the academy, and as such, would be forced to give Siren a failing grade if she arrived at the wrong time. The writer was pleasantly surprised to learn that Sir Field and Sir Celia were professors. The young people left the mansion, leaving the girl alone with this information. While they were discussing the functionality of the academy, Rosalia successfully collected a stack of books to prepare for the entrance exams. The owner of the mansion turned around after hearing a loud noise and was horrified by the number of books brought. With all zeal, she began to prepare for exams in mathematics, science, languages, as well as alchemy, the theory of magic and demonology. She diligently crammed the rest of the day and all night. After passing the exams, her strength began to leave her. Exhausted, Siren began to fall out of her chair, but felt someone's hand holding her behind her back. It was Sir Abel. He was quite nice to her and came over to show her around the campus since he had some free time. The two of them walked between campuses, the Blue Commander of the Night giving the writer a full tour. From their left, they heard the sound of a person approaching, and the voice of the Demon Lord told them that all the first years had long gathered and were only waiting for them. Abel bowed courteously and greeted His Majesty, placing his right hand over his heart. The king was looking for Siren Folix. He urgently needed to tell her something. It turned out that the Demon Lord wanted to discuss the details of their upcoming scene with her. She quickly interrupted the king so that he would not discuss such secret information in front of strangers. Sir Celia quickly realized that it was about him and hurried to say goodbye so as not to interfere with their conversation. The girl waved after the departing knight for a long time, and as soon as he moved away at a sufficient distance, she sank in anticipation of the upcoming conversation. Noticing the upset face of the writer, Claude wondered if she might have eaten something wrong or not eaten at all. Sighing with relief, Siren admitted that she only ate the sandwich that Sir Abel gave her. Despite the fact that she practically did not eat, Miss Folix felt as beautiful and fresh as ever. The news of the girl's condition pleased the king. He did not want her to pass out again while recreating part of the book. Using all her charm, she tried to persuade His Majesty to cancel everything today because of her extreme fatigue. Serene was completely exhausted. Even her attempt to show herself from her most beautiful side was unsuccessful. King Claude simply turned around and began to walk away from her, not paying attention to her antics. After some time, the creator of the novel reached the audience where the admission ceremony was taking place. As soon as the Demon Lord and his wife entered the classroom, everyone present began to greet them in unison. The girl fixed her gaze on the beautiful smile of the young king and involuntarily thought that he was smiling very sweetly. The main speech began, saying that the Academy is an institution that trains gem-wielding demons on how to become stronger. Listening to the opening speech, the writer felt someone's heavy gaze on her, and trying to find the person watching, she turned to the back rows. A rather handsome guy devoured her with his gaze. Noticing that she saw him, he quickly sat down next to her. The young man began a dialogue about admission, and that for him the exams were a piece of cake. Later, he introduced himself. His name was Kermit Glacia, and immediately invited Siren to communicate informally. She also decided to introduce herself, but Kermit already knew her name, which greatly surprised the writer. The surprise didn't end with the name, because the guy said that she was the mistress of the Demon Lord. From what was said, the girl could not hide her emotions and accidentally gave herself away by asking how he knew what she looked like. Siren was very curious about who was spreading the rumors about her and how it spread throughout the kingdom so quickly. Kermit was always interested in rumors, as they were the main focus of his investments, and just a few hours ago, he saw them with Abel. The writer was hooked by the interesting thinking of Mr. Glacia, hoping in her heart that besides him, no one else knew about their secret with the king. The guy looked like an anthropomorphic demon, and she decided to ask what he was doing. He turned out to be an investor in stocks, and was particularly attracted to investment technologies. Worried that she would now be forced to buy something unknown, Siren tried to interrupt their dialogue. She looked at him, thinking about his serious hobbies, not knowing how to continue communicating informally. The girl was still wondering why the guy was looking at her so intently. The answer surprised her greatly, because looking at her, his heart began to beat wildly. Such a statement made Siren's face turn red. It is from such words that couples are formed on campus. Kermit bought a lot of shares due to the growing interest in concubines and believed that she was the one who caused this demand. But having learned that it was not her fault, he still intended to hold them until they increased in value. While they were chatting peacefully, the king finished his speech and gave the floor to the queen. The guy immediately drew attention to her, as if he had known her for a long time. He believed that Valaria was the most beautiful woman in Atara. The lily ornament in her hair was a wind elemental gem passed down from generation to generation of the royal family of Atara. Kermit went on to say that everyone in her kingdom was ready to support Valaria's claim to the throne. A son was born into the Atara family, and the princess was immediately deprived of her position as heiress. Knowing that only a person close to the queen could know such information, Siren asked the guy who he was related to her. Everything was much simpler than she thought, because he was content with articles and rumors. After the ceremony, the writer returned to her room and quickly fell asleep due to accumulated fatigue. The next morning, Rosalia disturbed her, saying that it was time for her to see the king. Getting ready didn't take much time, and half an hour later the girl stood in the chambers of the demon lord. The king looked at her very strangely. It drove her crazy. Siren asked what was wrong with her. She realized that this look was a consequence of the fatigue of yesterday's ceremony. The bishop notified her that if an applicant scores high, their guardian is immediately called. Recommenders automatically became guardians of those who did not have any relatives. She had to pass the definition of the elemental element, but before that she had to act out a scene. Siren carefully climbed onto the king. He held her by the waist, but her legs were not ready for such a load. That's why she asked the king to hurry up and kiss her on the neck, as it was written in the book. Regretting that she had not taken into account the heroine's endurance when writing the novel, she continued to ask to return to the script. To ease her suffering, the king allowed her not to stand, but to sit calmly on his feet. The girl sat down on his legs with relief and smoothly crossed her own behind his back. Claude only hugged her fragile waist tighter, thinking that she would have to attend fitness classes. Their faces were very close. They felt each other's exciting breath. There was little time, and Siren hurried the lord so that he could kiss her as soon as possible. The king's face turned red because it seemed to him that she was not asking for a kiss because of the stage. Both their hearts were beating fast and hard, and he began to slowly approach her face. They were interrupted by a telephone call from the bishop. He picked up the phone, and there was a representative of the receiving committee on the other end. Continuing to listen to the voice on the phone, Claude rushed to Siren's neck. She suddenly felt the warmth of his lips, and then his tongue. Straightening up, the bishop continued the dialogue on the phone, pretending that nothing had happened. Listening carefully to the voice, his gaze became colder, and his voice took on the most serious tone. The girl was excited by such a sudden change in the king's mood. She was also eager to find out whether she had entered the academy. Her heart was now jumping with delight, because she sincerely hoped that she had passed all the exams perfectly. The lord turned off the call and looked at her menacingly. He was informed that his ward passed only one exam out of all. Very angry, the king got out of bed and began to walk around the room, indignant at Siren. He explained to her that the girl would have to attend a consultation with her guardian, but he did not have time for this, and therefore she would go with Willia. The writer thought that Claude was simply too ashamed to appear in public with her. Sometime later, she was already sitting in the car with the queen, heading to the academy. The girl only remained silent, ashamed to utter the slightest sound, and timidly shed a tear. Without thinking twice, she decided to ask whether the ruler wanted her to be his concubine. Vilaria smiled sweetly and calmly replied that of course he wanted her, and decided to tell him why she was trying to bring the writer and the king together. 7 years ago, the queen witnessed the natural birth of darkness, from which the ruler emerged, and since she is a creature of light, touching him, she experiences severe, uncontrollable anger. Lady Atara was not offended by the king for sealing her brother. In her heart, she understood that otherwise she would have had to kill him herself. The queen's father and brother were out of their minds. They were both despotic, the most cruel tyrants. Stealing the throne was not enough for the younger brother. He began to gradually kill his citizens. Vilya saw how her brother was on the verge of death, and at the last moment tried to save him, hoping for the mercy of his majesty. For this reason, the queen agreed to help the new king in matters of state. In the world of demons, the consent of the people is necessary to recognize the right to the throne. Valaria's status allowed Claude to take the rightful throne. Having finished with the history of her situation, she took the writer's hand and asked her to become the king's concubine. Serene was stunned by such a request. She never expected that the queen would ask for such a thing. The queen told the writer about her plans to return to Atara, but until then she will fulfill her duties as queen. The writer realized that if a new queen appeared, the current one would be able to return to her homeland. The lady suggested that she would not be able to leave immediately, but if that were the case, then there would be no need to issue a decree about it, and then she would read her favorite novels in the secret room. The girl asked a completely logical question about why she didn't just secretly run away. It turned out that the queen could not break the oath she had made on her gem. Valeria did not even hope that a writer would so quickly burst into her boring life and dilute her loneliness. She advised her companion to mentally prepare for the possible imminent recognition of the king. Confirming her speculations, Vilya told how the king stared sharply into space and touched his lips with his palm, which he had never done. Siren was sure of the exact opposite, because the Lord did not even allow her to sit next to him until she had learned the terms from the textbook to perfection. It was clear to her that His Majesty did not like her, but the question was why he was helping her with her admission. Promising to do everything possible during the consultation, Valeria made the writer promise to add a part with the Academy to her new books. Time passed quickly, and they were already standing inside the rector's office, who politely greeted them. Villa turned to Rector Spica with a request to explain why they were called, to which the lady handed her a list with Siren's grades, after looking at which the queen realized that it would be difficult for her ward to study. The rector was interested in why His Majesty personally recommended this lady to the Academy. Smiling sweetly, Valeria replied that the girl was the main royal author, and she needed to gain a variety of experiences for creativity. The writer felt embarrassed that she was being discussed in front of her, and she was also embarrassed by the stern look of the rector. Unexpectedly for everyone, Spica quickly approached Siren and took her chin, looking sternly into her eyes. Seeing the fear in the girl's eyes, the rector walked out of the room, saying that since this was His Majesty's order, it was worth carrying out. She stopped in the doorway and suggested they go look at the student's stone. The three of them entered the room to determine magical power. Jade Gerald, who owned the red stone and was enrolled in the class, was already standing there. The meaning of the stone was determined using a moon crystal, which had to be held in the hands. Such crystals are more valuable in the world of demons than diamonds, because the magic introduced into them is stored until the diamond breaks. While thinking about this, the girl noticed that one of the students was crying and decided to ask the queen about it. Claude unwittingly overheard their conversation about how many students drop out of training due to the inability to use their magic, since the academy only teaches elementary magic. Noticing the king, the rector greeted him with a bow, and the other two ladies looked at him with a puzzled look. The overlord asked Ray Field to help him determine the strength of the next student. It was, of course, about Siren, and quickly realizing this, she froze in place, her body numb with excitement. Mr. Field was not taken aback. He gently placed the moonstone in her palms and told her to close her eyes. A few seconds later, the writer opened her eyes and saw that her stone did not have a specific color. It seemed to just glow brightly. The librarian, seeing this, concluded that she had a rather rare element of light. The girl did not understand what element we were talking about and decided that this was what they called the element of fire. Paul Segan explained that the girl has the same light element as the Demon Lord. Perplexed by what she heard, she thought that since she has the element of light, it means she is not just a randomly materialized demon. Suddenly, the Demon Lord suddenly fell to the floor, thereby frightening everyone standing around. Everyone present quickly rushed to his aid, trying to bring him to consciousness. Abel Celia took the king under the shoulder, giving him support, and Ray Field held him at his side. Valeria told them to hurry up and take His Highness to the palace and his chambers. Still not believing what she saw, the rector asked the librarian whether Siren really had the element of light, and the girl mentally reproached herself for possessing such power, which made the ruler feel bad. Kermit suddenly came up and interrupted her soul-searching, and said that she really was causing trouble wherever she went. If he knew that it possessed such an element, he most likely would have bought the corresponding shares. The writer knew nothing about her element until that day, and she also had no idea that she and Kermit would study in the same class. Siren couldn't get the fainting demon lord out of her head and interrupted the dialogue with the guy. Noticing the sad girl, the rector looked at her with interest and decided to approach her. after which she invited her to visit the king first. Arriving at the palace, the writer asked Rosalia if this had happened before, or maybe Claude had bad habits. The maid told her that the bishop often does not sleep at night, solving state problems, and overeats on sweets like caramel. Unlike people, demons feed on committing sins, but they may not be as significant as, for example, theft. The demon lord chose one of the sins for himself, gluttony, although he ate exclusively on caramel. Entering the king's bedroom, Siren saw that everyone was standing worriedly near his bed. Claude himself had not yet woken up. The girl standing closest to the patient turned out to be a specialist in healing magic. Daphne Rain. She was also the captain of the Knights of the Silver Wind. After some time, His Majesty woke up, and the first thing that interested him was how long he had been unconscious. Miss Rain kindly replied that he had no internal injuries and had only been unconscious for 30 minutes. Valaria remembered that His Majesty's element is darkness, and Siren's element is light. During the war, she leafed through a book about light and darkness, which mentioned that light and darkness can influence each other. The nobles forbade the dissemination of information about the element of light, since little was known about it. The king ordered Paul Segan to find out everything he could about the element of light. Taking out the tablet, the librarian quickly found the mentioned book, which he reported to the bishop. Only one writer was interested in how quickly the librarian found the necessary book, which he did not know about at all. Claude tried to get more information from Valaria, but she had not read the entire book and did not know all the details. Light is an element that quickly becomes polluted, and that is why it is highly susceptible to alcohol and poisons. Siren decided to write to Dylan about this so that he would no longer wonder why she gets drunk from just one glass. The girl was tormented by her own feelings. She hoped that the demon lord would die, and was annoyed that he was recovering. Her torment was interrupted by Daphne's cry that His Majesty was not well again. The healer froze as soon as the writer burst into the room, and the king immediately woke up. Valaria suggested that Claude save his strength and summon the Shadow Knight Coron. The king very quietly, with the last of his strength, called his servant, after which he fell asleep. The Shadow Knight was also not healthy, which Siren quickly noticed and asked him about it. Corin replied enthusiastically that he began to feel better as Miss Follix approached him. While everyone was looking at her questioningly, the writer only thought that her body was emitting some kind of waves or something like that. Returning to her mansion, she continued to torment herself with the thought that the king's illness arose precisely because of her. Rosalia entered the room and notified her of the arrival of King Claude's servant, who was very weak and trembling. He slowly rose from his knees, overcoming weakness, and said that he had arrived by order of His Majesty. They went to the demon lord's bedroom, where the queen was at that time, reasoning that the king and the author were a fateful pair of light and darkness. Siren thought that since she possessed the element of light, like in the games, she most likely possessed healing magic. Valaria led her to the bed of the ruler, who was still lying unconscious. Claude lay naked in his bed, shivering from a fever and his clothes hampering his body. The queen giggled sheepishly, explaining that the petals on the bed were medicinal herbs from Etara. The girl was completely taken aback when she saw the bath bombs, candles, and blindfold. Velia continued to say that the bathtub was big enough to accommodate the two of them. Pressing the remote control, she turned on the radio and quickly left the room, leaving the writer to do her job. The girl tried to turn off the loud-sounding radio so as not to disturb the sick king. It was too late. The lord looked at her futile attempts to figure out the switch. Turning around, she smiled sweetly at him and embarrassedly asked how long ago he had woken up. The demon lord calmly examined Siren, leaning on the headboard of the bed. The writer tried to justify herself by saying that it was not she who turned on the damned radio. He continued to look at her with confusion. All this was indifferent to him. Getting out of bed, the king noticed how much the girl devoured his body with her eyes. Claude reproached her for this, to which she replied that she was just making sure that His Highness did not fall again. Turning off the radio, he clenched his teeth, and this slightest manifestation of illness did not escape Siren's attention. The girl advised him to go back to bed and not overexert himself in his body. Sitting down on the bed, she embarrassedly patted it, hinting for the lord to lie down next to her. The king obediently lay down in bed, continuing to hint to the writer that she had been admiring his body for a very long time. His head was pounding. The illness did not subside, but he felt relief when he took a horizontal position. She placed a towel on his forehead after soaking it in cold water. The king said that it would be better for him if she did what she wanted to do silently, and Siren thought he meant to continue acting out the scenes. But he meant for her to be within his line of sight and not wander aimlessly around the room. The writer decided that it would be a good idea to simply lie down next to the sick person. Removing the towel from his forehead, the bishop informed her that the headache had finally passed. The girl looked at him intently, admiring the fact that even while sick, he looked amazing. Claude caught her gaze and commented that she was sinking lower and lower. After this caustic phrase, he calmly continued to say that he never expected her to come today. She replied that until he became a wise ruler who smiled so hard that his mouth ached, she could not allow him to die. The demon lord turned sharply to face her so that she could feel his breath and asked if she would always be by his side. Examining him, the girl continued to think about how handsome the king was. She closed her eyes and asked His Majesty to turn away from her because she could not resist his gaze. His face was too beautiful. It drove her crazy, and she asked him to turn over again. Opening her eyes slightly, Siren saw the king smile, which made his gaze even more frank. Catching his gaze, she asked the king if he knew what color his eyes were. Claude replied that they were black, but it seemed to the girl that they were a completely different color. His eyes were blue-violet, like his hair, but you had to look closely to tell. He had no time to look at his reflection in the mirror, so he never noticed such a little thing as eye color. The girl was chatting about how the demon lord had a sweet tooth before bed. She was worried that Claude had fainted due to the stress of introducing the writer into his life. Listening to her reasoning, he rudely stated that it was strange that she had the element of light, and at the same time she failed all the exams. The king assumed that she would have exactly this power, which stunned the unsuspecting Sirene. His face took on the most serious look, and the Lord asked if she realized the importance of possessing the element of light. According to the modification of the crystal, demons can possess the elements of water, fire, earth, wind, or nothing at all. But the element of light is the rarest among them. In their world, there is even a group that hunts for those with rare powers. The latter completely frightened the writer. She looked questioningly at the king, clearly expecting guidance for some action. Laughing, the bishop suggested signing somewhere else so that she would not be able to enter the academy to maintain safety. Since he felt better, the girl decided that she was free, but his hand was on her waist faster than she could get out of bed. Claude gently pressed himself against her, said nothing, and only felt the sweet scent of her body. Siren's thoughts were that most likely there was such a scene in the book, and he was simply carrying out the plan. She reassured herself that this was all to prevent half the country from going to prison. According to the book, there should have been a kiss in this scene, but instead, the demon lord moved away a little to see the girl's face. The writer asked him to kiss her quickly and get it over with if he would do that, of course. He only answered negatively and smoothly ran his finger over her wet lips. The girl thought that Claude, according to all the canons of the book, would decide to confess his feelings to her, and she would need to respond in kind. The ruler had his own plans for this. He touched her lips with his lips, and they merged in a tender kiss. Her face turned red again, and in a trembling voice, she said that it seemed the king had forgotten the lines a little. Continuing to look at her tenderly, Claude said that he did not do this because he forgot the lines. Placing her on the bed, the king hovered over her, making Sirene think he was drunk. Their lips touched again in a sweet kiss, and their hearts beat in unison. Leaning back a little, he told her that he was fine, so why did she think he was drunk? The girl noticed a sharp change in the bishop, and asked if he was offended by her. His Majesty shook his head and said that he had a personal interest in her. There was an awkward pause due to the words spoken by Siren, who continued to play her role, and she addressed the character of the book, asking if he loved her. Then, having come to her senses a little, the writer embarrassedly asked the king to honestly answer how he felt about her. Claude tried to avoid answering by saying that he simply knew her well and that he was content with that. Without restraining her ardor, the girl continued that his love for her was the same as for his citizens. or that he was simply too proud to admit his feelings to her. The bishop did not like this statement. He interrupted her speculations, saying that she was wrong. Then the writer took decisive action and said that since she had raised this issue, it would constantly be spinning in his head. Touching his face with her soft hand, the girl languidly called him "my master." In an instant, their lips were close again, but this time she initiated the kiss. After which she looked at the embarrassed king and said that his feelings were obvious to everyone. His face flushed red. Apparently it hit the very truth that he hid even from himself. The reason the king sued her was because he couldn't differentiate between frustration and love. The writer was amused by the king's embarrassment, which is why she said that as soon as he confessed his feelings to her, she would begin to play with him as she wanted. She started talking about her plans, for example, to kiss and then ignore or write a message and not read the answer for a long time. To sum it up, she asked whether the king's feelings would be hurt if someone as handsome first honored him with attention and then abandoned him. Siren felt his heart beating wildly. His whole inside spoke for him that he liked her. The king was not at all inclined. He did not want to be the first to admit his feelings. The girl played for big. She said that she would gladly kiss him if he confessed now, which made the ruler think. Moving even closer to him, she simply spoke of one small kiss. Without waiting for his answer, the writer lay down under the blanket, muttering that he was free to do as he wanted, and that the king apparently preferred the thorny path rather than the short one. She understood that no matter how big a shot he was, this fight was won by her. She woke up the next morning cheerful and full of strength, and peacefully stretched to awaken from her sleep. Vladika sat next to her and seemed to be burning her with his eyes. She said that she understood that she was too beautiful, but she shouldn't look at her like that because of this. The evil king said that this was nonsense and reminded her that she was planning to go to the academy. Serene made a cute expression and said that she would like to have a sandwich for breakfast. Claude exhaled dissatisfiedly and said that he could spoon-feed her. Continuing to mock him, the writer continued to talk about how flexible men become when they fall in love. The sun's rays brightly illuminated the girl on the bed. She was completely pleased with herself. Two maids entered the bedroom with 2 trays full of excellent food. Licking her lips, the writer quickly began to devour her delicious breakfast. Meanwhile, the demon lord hurried out of the room and went about his business. In the academy's courtyard, Siren accidentally saw Kermit heading straight towards her. The first thing he urgently asked her was whether she had read Gerald's post today. The article stated that disclosing the identities of the element's owners is now prohibited by law. The guy assumed that the king cared deeply about his ward and concluded that he had correctly bought up all the shares associated with the concubines. Deciding to get off topic, she asked him what courses he signed up for, and it turned out that they didn't have to choose them. The best students choose the courses first, and then those who fail the exams. Accordingly, students in the lagging class have no choice and attend the remaining lectures. This information was told to them by a guy who quickly approached them from behind. He was the same demon who was in the best class and owned the element of fire. Siren didn't know the name of this smart guy and decided to check with Kermit about his name. His name was Jade Gerald, the youngest son of a newspaper magnate who was ranked in the top 10 of the demon world. The girl continued to reason that since he was publishing about the royal court, he most likely belonged to the group responsible for night work. She was right. The young man standing in front of her was none other than a vampire. Thinking only that he would be the hero in her next novel, she continued to ask him about his studies. But the guy was infuriated by the idea that there should have been greater interest in his person, and the writer lured all the fame to herself. Not daring to endure his anger any longer, he pointed his finger at her and challenged the girl to a duel. Siren was frightened by the word duel and answered him that she did not yet know how to fight, much less dodge or run. After discovering that she was a light elementalist, all the gossip and everyone's attention was directed only at her. Jade needed recognition from the demon lord himself. Kermit realized that the rumors were true. The girl thought that the entire demon world supported the king. Even super popular groups at the peak of their careers did not have such support. She looked at the youngest son of the tycoon, and remembering how she treated the demon lord in the morning, she realized that the guy could have beaten her for this. He had a very high opinion of the king, his rule, and how he saved everyone during the war. The writer decided to play along with him in his performance of praising the king and began nodding and supporting him approvingly. The guy decided to end his speech by saying that the ruler could always hold an audience thanks to the best students at the academy. In his opinion, Siren was the culprit of all the troubles associated with King Claude. The tension increased greatly. The three of them looked at each other, not knowing what else to say. Jade continued to pester her with questions about how she was able to get in and even end up in the worst class. Kermit commented that their argument was too loud and was attracting a lot of attention. The younger son seemed to have just noticed Mr. Glacia and asked what kind of annoying dog he was that couldn't stop barking. The guy introduced himself and explained that he also got a bad grade and was now studying with Miss Follix. Hearing his name, the vampire was surprised and asked if it was Kermit who had been called to the rector about the incident with the bats. The guy also asked if he was a resident of the Empire of Light, which greatly puzzled Siren. The raging Jade was indignant at the natives of the Empire of Light because the ruler forgave them for their sins, and they did not even swear allegiance to him. Kermit, who had been silent all this time, told the vampire to shut up and that he was only fit to be a jester for the king. Both angry, they looked at each other with bitterness, and the girl tried to explain that Kermit was with the rector because of failure in the exams. Hearing this, Jade decided to mock the guy and said that the rector really wants to communicate with losers like him, and in general, why hasn't she expelled him yet? The anger seethed in Kermit Glacia so much that his gaze darkened. He could barely control himself. Deciding to shift the conversation from himself to the writer, the guy noticed that it was more interesting for the vampire to actually be angry at Siren, and not at him. Remembering what started the dialogue, Jade took out his sword and told the girl to prepare for battle. She was frightened by such pressure, and reminded him that she did not yet have access to combat magic. This statement only made the opponent laugh. He said that since she is a light elementalist, how come she doesn't know how to fight? Kermit supported Mr. Gerald, wanting to see how the light power worked in battle. The enemy began to raise his sword to attack, simultaneously saying that she had no chance of studying at the academy. She only managed to cover her face with her hands when a flash of magic quickly knocked the sword out of the attacker's hands. Finally, opening her eyes, she saw that the violent guy was tied with a whip and could not take a single step. He fell and could not get up. All three did not understand what had happened and whose whip prevented the fight. Behind them stood Abel Celia and Ray Field, whose weapons stopped the rowdy guy. Jade was surprised to see two academy professors and didn't know what to tell them. Sir Ray said that if the short one got hurt, as he called Sirin, then his rich friend would not buy him a drink. Mr. Celia, on the other hand, was surprised by such a concentration of Mr. Gerald's power. The professor's words touched Jade's feelings. Tears of happiness welled up in his eyes that his strength was recognized at the academy. Turning to the commander of the Blue Knights, he embarrassedly began to say that he had not done anything special. The professor picked up the vampire's weapon and handed it to him, saying that he had received urgent orders this morning and was forced to demand an end to the duel. Abel reported that if even one hair falls from the author's head, both professors will be executed. Sirin was very interested in who gave such an order, to which Ray replied that she herself could guess. The writer quickly realized that the culprit was none other than King Claude. Unaware of the secret connection between Sirin and the king, Jade questioningly asked why the king did this. The girl looked at him slyly, but thought to herself that it would be better for the vampire not to interfere with her anymore. The captain of the Golden Knights said that protecting the owner of the element of light would soon become a matter of national importance, and that they needed to conduct a couple of tests to find out the full power of light magic. Abel shook hands with the vampire and offered to get to the lecture hall together. Sir Ray was the homeroom teacher of the backward class, and Sir Abel of the very first. Siren was very surprised by this news. Her best friend Dylan did not tell her about it. Kermit, meanwhile, took her by the shoulder and reminded her that they also needed to sign up for classes. Ray Field said that the best course is run by the Blue Knight commander and that his stream is already full. Approaching the list of free courses, the writer did not find a single line there. There was an order that the respected demons of the Empire of Light should be chosen for the position of commander of the Knights. Before the war, the continent was ruled by 4 families who were experts in their elements. The head of each house became the lord of their territories. But the coming demon lord destroyed the stones of the rulers, and the power that maintained order through magic disappeared. The Atara family ruled together with the Cielia family. Her Majesty survived thanks to a false marriage with the king, but little was known about the Abel family. Siren decided to find out from Kermit how the Cielia clan survived this terrible war. The guy became thoughtful, closed his eyes, sighed, and began to remember the events of 7 years ago. Abel's family survived thanks to corruption and deception that is not entirely fair to other families. The king knew that the former baron was not a purebred descendant of the Cielia family, which is why he apparently spared his life. He was an illegitimate son. One night, a concubine who lived there gave birth to him. Initially, Abel's brother was supposed to become the rightful lord of the lands of their family. All the lords of the Empire of Light ruled through dictatorship, but Abel was not one of them, and all mentions of the war were hidden from ordinary people, so Siren really didn't know anything. She assumed that the Blue Knight commander killed his brother and took the place of the lord in his place. The Cielian family sent Abel to war as a lord, even though he had no fighting skills. The girl continued to wonder why the lord suddenly spared him, and what promise the newly made lord made in return. She assumed that Abel proposed to give the castle of Cielia to the king's possession. According to tradition, the king of the Night Empire is ruled by the Cielia clan, and in fact, the professor is the legal heir of the empire. The writer was never able to unravel the king's plan, but then decided that Kermit simply made it up or read it in an unreliable source. They found their schedule. The girl was the first to look at it and realized that they had completely screwed up. After asking for help, she handed the sheet to the advisor so that he could confirm that the schedule was correct. He advised them to head to the dean, since they had indeed signed up for all their classes too late, and there was nothing he could do about it. The advisor returned the paper to Sirene. She took it with a trembling hand, realizing that a trip to the rector could not be prevented. The rector was very indignant that they were the last to register for the courses, to which the young people began a story about the attacking vampire. Spica offered them 2 options, namely, taking 2 courses every day or condensing all their classes into 2 days. They preferred the 2-day option to relieve some of the stress on the training. Having resolved the issue with the schedule, the rector asked how His Majesty was feeling, because he had never lost consciousness before. The Queen once read a book about divergence and knew how to alleviate the patient's condition. The lady suggested that it was about a book that Paul Sagan wrote about light and darkness, although he does not remember this. This discouraged Siren. She could not even think that the librarian could forget about his written book. Seeing the girl's interest, the rector asked if she wanted Paul to restore his memory. She insisted that it was the writer who could help him find his lost memories. A mysterious box with a large moonstone in the middle appeared in her hands, and the lady asked the author to bring her finger to it. Clicking on the crystal, the writer noticed that sweets began to appear in the box. Spica said that by giving the librarian 1 piece of candy a day, she would gradually restore his memory back. The girl thought about her ability to heal. She never thought that she could cure amnesia. After everything, the rector released them. They thanked her and calmly went to class. Returning from the academy, Siren ran straight to the king's chambers, hoping that he was looking forward to their meeting. In response, she heard that he never said that he was waiting for her, and she realized that he was not at all skilled in love affairs. The girl told the king that her registration had gone badly, and she would not be in the palace 2 days a week. The demon lord offered to change her schedule, to which she asked why he was so kind to her. He asked her with interest if she was tired of looking at his face every day. Siren replied that every time she looks at him with delight, just like the first time. The king made an attempt to find out why she was the last to register, and whether she really had troubles at the academy, but the writer quickly saw through his impulse to find out how her day went. Confused, Claude replied that he was really curious to know more about it. She looked at him. It seemed to her that he said that he loved her, which she informed the bishop about. Looking straight into his eyes, she thought that no matter how much he looked at her, for her it was and would be damn sexy. Turning around, she walked away from him, realizing that he would not utter a word because he did not want to lose this battle. Realizing that the dialogue had reached a dead end, the writer took out the box and told Claude about everything. Holding the box in her hand, she waited for some action from the demon lord. He just looked at her and her lips, trying to get closer and kiss her. Siren realized this in time and reminded him of the agreement that until he confessed his feelings to her, he would not be able to kiss her. She also clarified in the conditions that there would be a kiss only if they looked at each other for a long time, and when he hugs her, so that everything would be as romantic as possible. Claude could only exhale resignedly and smile sweetly, succumbing to her conditions. Trying to walk past him, she stumbled out of the blue, and the king managed to catch him. Holding her practically in his arms, he asked if this could be considered being in his arms. Since they looked into each other's eyes long enough, eye contact could be considered completed. The writer closed her eyes in anticipation of the cherished kiss. After all, she herself set such conditions. The demon lord looked at her for a long time, doing nothing, only pressing her closer to him. After some time, their lips met in a passionate kiss, initiated by both of them. He didn't want to end this moment, so he touched the girl's face with his hand. Having let her go, he decided to admit it to himself first and began to talk about how he felt. It drove her crazy knowing that he knew what she wanted, since he had read her novel in its entirety. The king's speech was interrupted by the Dark Knight, who had an urgent question for the king. The servant who arrived began to talk about how he had gone to the continent of Day, as his majesty had ordered. The couple looked at him with strong anger, but Corin, who did not understand anything, decided to clarify whether he was in time. Trying to rectify the situation, he took out a list of 50 sandwich recipes from Chef Gonzalez and handed it to the bishop. Siren, hearing the name of her favorite chef, couldn't believe that Claude was so meticulous in details. She remembered the moment the previous morning when she wanted sandwiches for breakfast. She looked sweetly at the king, who was trying to hide his embarrassment from her. His honorary servant also became emotional and said that he had served him for 7 years and immediately realized that the order was given because of the lord's affection for Miss Follix. The girl then watched as His Majesty's face gradually turned red, and then his ears began to turn red. She thought it was very cute. The knight, meanwhile, tried to sneak out of the room, suggesting that the list should be given to the kitchen. The cheerful writer began to hint to Claude that receiving recipes from the most famous chef meant a little more than just being infatuated with her. Continuing to blush, he reminded her that she was going to the library. The girl did not let up and continued to pester the king with a request to finally confess to her. Tired of such fun, Claude quickly turned around and loudly ordered her to follow him. Entering the library, they saw tired Paul and Valaria sitting behind a pile of books. Siren reported that she had an item for the librarian personally that would help restore his memory. She handed him a small box and told him everything that the rector had told her. Her idea was met with great enthusiasm. The librarian thanked her for her attention, and the queen said that the idea was quite good. The writer decided to ask whether the rector was an expert on divergence, to which she received a positive response from Velia. Lady Atara also mentioned that the rector is the most loyal member of the Dawn Society, which Jade also mentioned. The Dawn Society can be considered a religious group that worships the god who created the world of demons. Mainly before the war, they operated in the continent of night and were subjected to much persecution. Now, their religion is considered heresy. Looking at the king, Valaria continued that the new ruler had graciously forgiven them. Those gathered in the library decided to check how the box brought by the writer worked. The girl touched the crystal with her finger, causing it to sparkle so that the entire library was flooded with light. Opening the box, they saw a small candy, and Paul immediately decided to try it. He suddenly froze in place, and the king asked him if everything was okay with him. The librarian replied that he had no idea that Miss Follix's magic would be peach-flavored. The king and his beloved looked at Paul blankly, but did he say that his chronic migraine had subsided? Valaria laughed at the old man's hope of being cured in one go and told him to take the medicine every day. While Siren was thinking that her magic still heals people, but it is not clear whether it cures amnesia, the queen did not miss the chance to ask if they were together. Looking at them again, she definitely noticed that they didn't look bad together. The queen began to tell the writer that when an envoy from another continent comes to them, Claude organizes a banquet for a whole week. and that Sirin is obliged to join them. The king sat down at the table and nervously began to read the report prepared for him by Willia. Having examined the writer's lips more closely, Lady Atara realized that they were definitely together. Returning to her mansion, the girl told her maid about everything, to which she suggested that she prepare an outfit for the arrival of the envoy. Rosalia remembered the protocols required at receptions and asked if the lady knew about them. Sirin had never taken part in such events and knew nothing about the protocols. She asked the maid to tell her about them or maybe even help her prepare for some. The assistant was pleased to tell her that they just had the whole night to learn everything, to which the writer did not react very happily. The protocols are divided into two types, namely the continents of day and night. They also represent slight differences between the four families. But since the royal palace is located in the Cielian castle, the ball will correspond to the Cielian traditions. The writer was amazed how the world of demons has quite a rich history. Rosalia clapped her hands joyfully when her mistress made even the slightest progress in understanding etiquette. The girl tried to learn to maintain her posture while walking with a book on her head so that the object would never fall to the floor. This was only the beginning of preparations. It was necessary to find out what matters would be negotiated at the banquet. To do this, Rosaria recommended that Sirin go to the library to clarify all the questions of interest. The writer invited the maid to go with her, but every time she was asked to write a report on the books as soon as she appeared in front of Mr. Segan. Deciding not to torment the worker with additional assignments, she headed to the library alone, where she found Paul. The girl told him that she needed to prepare for small talk. The librarian adjusted her glasses and began her with an exam testing her knowledge of current events and the customs of the continent of the day. Sirin realized that all this would drag on for a long time, and she would not get home soon. Paul mercilessly asked Miss Follix the most tricky questions. She gave them the wrong answers, and he corrected her a lot in pain. Completely exhausted with her, he asked her to name the four families that ruled the empire the day before the war. Without waiting for an answer, he himself answered his own question, that the correct answer was Calipo of the Earth faction, Hale of the Water faction, Florus of the Fire faction, and Etera of the Air faction. Mr. Segan also reminded that when speaking about families, I mean families that mastered their factional abilities before the war, and not families to which the commanders belong. Suddenly the front door opened, and the king appeared on the threshold of the library, asking the librarian to give an answer to the information he had requested. Seeing that Paul was not alone in the library, he asked Sirin why she was there. His flushed face spoke more eloquently than his cold and reserved tone of speech. The writer demonstrated all her recently learned protocol manners. The demon lord was only surprised at what all these formalities were for, to which the girl made it clear to him that she was learning to behave correctly. The librarian wasted no time and found a stack of sheets with questions that the writer needed to learn. She resignedly took the stack and went to dive into knowledge, leaving the men alone. The king followed her. Leaving the library, he called her by her human name. Puzzled, Sirin turned around and asked why Claude followed her, to which he told her that he was free to go wherever he wanted. The girl indignantly replied that he could show a little respect to his guest. He continued to follow her until they entered a room where there was no one except them. Having reached the middle of the room, she turned around and saw that the demon lord was looking at her lovingly. The writer quickly approached him, stood up on her tiptoes, and kissed her king. Claude, taken aback, did not immediately understand what she was asking, but the question was whether this was what her master wanted. The crystal in his hand did not light up, which means they did not complete the planned scene. The girl continued to ask questions about what the ruler really wanted, whether he wanted something obscene. Opening the script, she noticed that it had a rather complex plot, and they should postpone it to another day. But the king quickly interrupted this thought, reminding her that tomorrow she had to study at the academy. Starting to take off her outerwear, Sirin gave him orders that they needed to hurry up and get this over with quickly. Claude could only grin when he heard that they would need to hug and cuddle with each other. According to the script, they needed to lie in bed for 3 hours and kiss tenderly, to which the king hinted that the author simply loved to lie in bed. Sitting on the bed, he called her to him, saying that he thought she was tired and invited her to sit on the bed. She took out the librarian's notes and smoothly lay down on the bed, preparing to carefully study the papers. Jokingly, Siren extended her hand to him and suggested that he start by kissing her hand. Smoothly kissing her tender hand, he moved from her fingers to her elbow, and noticing that she was beginning to like it, he sharply bit her just below the elbow. In response to her cry that she was in pain, the bishop asked her to reconcile herself, to which she noticed that he had no manners. Claude noticed that she was the one who was not immersed in the process, as she was doing several things at the same time. She stroked his hair gently, indignant that the notes only contained questions. Vladika wanted to continue biting her hand, but the writer began to ask her not to do this. Sensing some excitement in his heart, the king softened his tone and said that he was not going to stop. Overshadowing the change, the girl hinted that he had fallen for her, but the bishop continued his speech about how he would not confess first. Giving up attempts to reach his heart, the writer invited him to lie down. Deciding not to waste time, Siren began asking questions to the king, which he had to answer. Claude reproached her for not knowing the leaders of the academy where she was studying, but she playfully winked at him and said that she knew Claude Stern himself. He shuddered from such pressure of tenderness on her part, and again involuntarily blushed. The girl, of course, noticed this, and mockingly asked that he blushed because he was glad to hear this. Confused by the questions she asked, the bishop decided to answer only the librarian's questions. There were 4 active commanders, namely the Earth faction, Ray Field, the Water faction, Abel Cielia, the Fire faction, Victoria Scrallet, the Air faction, Daphne Rain, and Koron, the Shadow commander. Siren was interested in the question of whether it was true that there was not a single commander in the Empire of Light. The Demon Lord told her that Iris Rain, Daphne Rain's older sister, had been exiled there. Now the writer knew her personally, but decided to clarify that this was the person who came to the rescue while the king was unconscious. He calmly stroked her hair while she thought about what question to ask next. Seeing the question, she blushed. It was about which publishing house was the best in the Empire of Night. Demon was considered the best publishing house. It was there that her novel was published, and the owner was her friend Dylan Aldebaran. Hearing this name, the Lord involuntarily frowned, and Siren asked him to tell her like it is if he was going to be so obvious and jealous of her best friend. The king affectionately stroked her hair, asking who the owner of the publishing house was to her. His fingers accidentally touched the writer's ear, causing her to flinch and swallow loudly. Deciding not to focus on this, the girl continued asking questions about the ranking system. She had absolutely no idea what the ranking system was, and then the Lord began to explain to her. There are 7 deadly sins, namely pride, greed, anger, envy, lust, gluttony, and despondency, and every inhabitant of this world has the beginnings of these vices. The most famous chef Gonzalez has the beginnings of a glutton, which makes him want to try more and more food. The germ can affect the demon's mind. Depending on how strongly the inhabitant is captured, the sin can manifest itself in different ways. Siren wondered if the germ of envy makes everyone around them envious of the owners of this sin. Claude gently clung to her cheek, kissed her, and mysteriously invited her to guess for herself. She didn't like that he stopped explaining the questions to her, and she asked for a hint, to which he replied that a man has this vice. Her reasoning led to the queen's brother. She believed that if he were king, many would envy him. Beelzebub Atara possessed the beginnings of anger. The writer wondered how many people he angered in order to receive such a title. Not knowing who the owner of envy was, she begged for another clue. His hand warmly touched the girl's back. Feeling this, she involuntarily began to ask where he had gone. The sharp memory of his signature on her back made her realize that there was a certain germ in him too. The writer finally realized that the germ of envy was in her ruler, Claude Stern. He glanced sharply at his watch. Their time was running out, and they needed to complete the entire scenario. Looking at the crystal that did not shine, it loomed over her. The writer was no longer embarrassed by this. She, on the contrary, got used to the role well, and said one of the lines about whether her king missed her. Claude told her to be quiet, and they shared a passionate kiss, ending their script for the day. For a long time, they could not tear themselves away from each other. Their hearts beat in unison. The warmth of their bodies made them breathe faster. Finally, the crystal shone and rattled, and they turned around to make sure that they had played everything correctly. Claude nervously straightened his tie and suggested doing a lot more for research. Siren woke up the next morning from the arrival of a maid, who informed her that a banquet would be held today. Jumping out of bed, the writer quickly began to change clothes and get herself in order. She didn't want all her preparation efforts to go in vain, because absolutely everyone helped her. Having completely collected herself, she first appeared to Rosaria, who almost cried from the beauty she saw. Villaria sent her a luxurious dress, and Siren wove real roses into her hair to match the color of the dress. The maid advised her to put her hair on one side, because then her bare shoulders looked more gentle. Entering the library, she found Sir Abel reading, who was so surprised by the beauty of Miss Follix that he was speechless. She practiced her protocol manners on him and introduced herself gracefully. Mr. Sheila said she looked like a completely different person. The librarian, watching all the action, smoothly entered the room, talking about how proud he was of his student. The writer laughed loudly and sweetly asked if his words were true. Unexpectedly, His Majesty Claude and his faithful crown also entered the library. Siren couldn't help but ask the king how good she looked. Paul reminded her of her manners, and that she should not speak like that in front of His Majesty. Laughing, the writer changed the old word bombastic to the new word charming. The king could not find words to describe his feelings about her image. The Dark Knight came to the rescue, reporting that Miss Follix looked magnificent and graceful. She asked for more compliments, and Corin added that Miss Follix looked like a ray of sunshine. They happily high-fived each other, and turning to the king, they advised him not to be jealous. The Shadow Commander lost half his power once the writer was given an atypical classification, but his powers are restored when he is near her. After the fun, the girl realized that her main exam was about to take place, for which everyone was preparing her. Everyone headed to the banquet hall together, the beauty of which took Siren's breath away. The guards in the hall loudly announced the arrival of His Majesty Claude Stern. The Demon Lord smoothly entered the hall along with his queen Villaria Atara. Velia looked very saddened. Despite this, the queen behaved with dignity. The writer decided that one of her relatives was present in the group of representatives of the Empire of Light. The festive banquet began with lots of delicious food, a frog harmonica orchestra, and many beautifully dressed guests. From admiring the banquet, the girl was interrupted by Sir Abel with a question whether she was preparing for dancing. He looked at her hopefully, but she replied that, unfortunately, she had not prepared for them. The beautiful girl standing behind them said that she was diligently preparing for the dance. Mr. Celia was not very impressed by this offer, to which Iris Rain replied that he was turning her down again. Siren quickly realized that standing in front of her was Daphne's older sister Rain, who had been sent to the Empire of Light. Turning sharply, Sir Abel rudely told her that he was not interested in dancing, especially if it was about her. Rayfield approached and clapped his hands loudly, announcing that this was the 486th refusal to her. The disappointed girl was not going to back down and looked at the writer with a puzzled expression. Siren Follix introduced herself properly, adding that she was a royal writer. Miss Rain had heard about her, but she was only interested in the relationship between Miss Follix and Sir Abel. The writer reassured her, saying that she had nothing to worry about. They were not lovers. But Iris was not satisfied with this answer and asked how she could trust her and who was the person to whom the author's heart was given. Not knowing what to answer, Siren looked thoughtful and hesitated for a long time to answer. The king arrived in time and asked Miss Rain what business she had with the royal author. The writer was very happy that Claude quickly realized that she needed his help. The girl, nervously, introduced herself to the king in accordance with the rules and said that she was glad to appear before him. The Demon Lord ordered Iris to rest well, as they had a lot of work to do tomorrow. She bowed low to him and loudly vowed to fulfill his instructions. Miss Rain quickly left, leaving the king alone with the royal author. The Demon Lord believed that Iris considered Siren to be her archenemy, to which the writer replied that if this was true, then she and Sir Abel were a cute couple. The king noticed a strange grin on the writer's face and asked why she was grinning so much. It seemed to him that just by thinking about Mr. Ciel, she became much happier. Not paying attention to what was said, the girl became curious how he managed to appear at the most opportune moment. She tenderly asked if he really constantly thinks about her, to which she received a timid affirmative answer. Stopping, Claude came closer to the writer so that no one could hear them. and quietly asked that if he called her at night, would she come to him. She replied that although she had not planned this, she would still agree to come. Before she could finish speaking, she grabbed him by the tailcoat and quickly pulled the demon lord towards her. Two beautiful lovers stood among a beautiful celebration and kissed tenderly. Having stopped the kiss, the writer looked mysteriously at Claude and told him to come to her bedroom tonight. Entering the royal author's room, the first thing that caught the king's eye was his beautiful hair, shimmering in the moonlight. Siren sat on the windowsill, crossing her legs and enjoying the fact that the demon lord was ready to come running to her at the first call. He devoured her with his gaze, understanding what actions she expected from him. Claude came close to her, looked into her eyes, and kissed her passionately, continuing that kiss at the banquet. Gently removing first her gloves and then his own, he said that the gloves were just a hindrance for them. The writer was dizzy with excitement, and she asked to come even closer. Otherwise, she was afraid to fall. He held her tightly to him, and realizing that she was all right, continued to take off his outer clothing. Watching him, he mockingly said that she had no idea how eager he was to enjoy her. Watching him slowly take off his shirt, the writer thought about the germ of envy that makes him so seductive. Unexpectedly for everyone, someone knocked on the front door, causing both lovers to flinch. The embarrassed girl did not understand who could be there at such a late hour, unless it was her maid, Rosalia. She quickly realized to hide the king in the closet so that no one would see him in such a depraved form. Rosalie was indeed standing behind the door, not expecting to see her mistress very out of breath. The maid informed her that a guest had come to the author, a certain old man standing right behind Rosalia. The guest introduced himself as Elgon Etara and asked the girl if she was Miss Siren Folix. The royal author did not understand why this man came to her, and even so late. Elgon Ethar was a relative of the queen, coming from a side branch of the Etara family, who for the time being took the throne in place of Valaria's brother. Combing his beard, the elder noted that Claude Stern did not take his eyes off the writer, and dared to ask since when they had a relationship. Siren took the guest seriously and asked him to observe etiquette when talking with her. Elgon didn't plan to speak politely of a king without a pedigree, nor did he think Arya was up to the task of being queen. The girl understood that we were talking about Queen Valaria, but how did this matter concern her? The elder, having heard the queen's new name, explained that in the Empire of Light, Valaria is called Arya. She has caused many problems since childhood. The writer again asked him not to speak out about Her Majesty. She was already quite tired of this conversation. Without hearing her, Elgon continued that the queen married a stranger. Her title was a dummy, and thanks to her appearance, he managed to betroth her to the demon lord. Cyrene was finally tired of listening to his nonsense. She pointed to the exit and ordered him to leave if he finished speaking. Dissatisfied with the decree, the elder angrily began to point out her lack of manners. The girl, pressing her hand to her chest, made it clear to him that she would always be faithful to the king of the Empire of Night. He decided not to give in and asked questions about how she could believe in a man without a pedigree, in whom even the pagans did not believe. Looking at him sternly, she answered him clearly that darkness knows no barriers. The elder laughed at her phrase, saying that the king is not darkness, but only an ordinary shadow. Siren continued to show him the way out, and firmly replied that the demon lord had built the foundation for the prosperity of the empire. Elgon accepted that he had been defeated, but finally said that when the king of Atara was unsealed, he would remember this to her. She was puzzled by these words. She asked who exactly the incomprehensible old man was talking about. He said that the seal that bound Beelzebub began to weaken, and therefore the powers of King Claude Stern, too. In his opinion, the war did not end 7 years ago, but is only now beginning. At the end of his strange speech, he added that the writer looked pretty. The latter brought her completely out, but she tried to pull herself together and calm down. Closing the door behind him, the girl felt the warmth of the king's hand lying on her shoulder. The calm was interrupted by the loud scream of the maid coming from outside the front door. Running out towards the loud noise, they found Elgon Etar lying dead, white foam flowing from his mouth. The girl asked the king if he had told her to calm down a minute ago, to which the ruler replied that he had not promised to let him go so easily. Turning to Rosalia, he ordered her to bring Queen Valaria to the mansion. When sending her, he asked her to tell Vilya that he had prepared a gift for her, even though her birthday was still far away. The queen was eager to see the gift, but she was indignant that he gave them on different dates every year. Without trying to catch her breath, she sat down to make sure that everything that was happening was true. The queen covered her mouth with her hands, not believing her eyes. Siren thought that it was hard for her to see the corpse of her own relative. Claude Stern smiled sweetly at her and said that even though the holiday was still far away, he congratulated her on her birthday. Valaria Atara's happiness knew no bounds. She had long asked the king to deal with him, but he did it only now. The girl, who did not understand anything, looked at them doomedly, asking herself more and more questions. Vilya tore off the old man's jewelry and asked if she could consider it part of the gift. She brought the object to her face, and in the light of the moon, they saw the Elgon stone in it. Claude didn't care about the stone. He just told her that his trinket couldn't cope with Valaria's magic. He was more concerned about the weakened seal holding her brother back, because it meant that her right to the throne was again in jeopardy. Siren confirmed what the king said and added that the elder believed that this was due to the weakening of his majesty. The king confirmed their fears for the first time. His magic reserve halved after collapsing. With the drop in the amount of magic, all the shadow commanders and Sir Coran became ill. The queen assumed that all these incidents happened after Serene opened her stone. In the demon world, there was a certain amount of magic divided into two groups. Namely, in the first group, there were ordinary elements, and in the other group, there were elements of darkness and light. Having discovered her power, the writer unwittingly took away half of Claude's magic, which is why he fainted. Continuing to kick the corpse with her heel, Valaria was glad that the one Elgon married her to was long dead. The girl, deep down in her soul, was glad that His Majesty did not take part in this murder. The queen reminded Siren that the exams were approaching, so she should find a quiet place and start studying for them. She had completely forgotten about the midterms and hoped that she had enough time to study for them. The class in which she studies with Kermit began to pass exams first of all. 2 weeks remained before the start of the first exams, and she had not even begun to prepare for them. The next day, she met with her classmate, whose appearance shocked her. He was so immersed in studying for midterm exams that he even forgot to sleep. Jade approached them again, challenging Miss Follix to a duel. His annoyingness angered Siren. She only asked how he himself was not tired of all this. But this time, the vampire meant the exam results, their combined score against his score. The writer was completely desperate. She was ready for only half of the exam questions. Jade caustically noted that she also took the entrance exams, and that she ended up in the weakest class. He continued to press the point, adding that the winner would receive the royal treatment until graduation. This arrangement suited the girl, and she decided to ask if it suited Kermit. Without waiting for an answer, she took it as a positive answer and accepted the vampire's argument. Siren promised herself to do everything possible to win this bet. She would not forgive herself for any other outcome. Wandering around the academy, she looked for Professor Ray to find out where she could study. Looking around the corner, she accidentally witnessed a spicy scene between Sir Ray and Miss Scarlet. Leaning closer to her, he wondered what she was doing after drinking tea. The lady replied that she needed to write questions for the upcoming exam. The professor continued to insistently offer to visit his castle and relax together, until she gestured to him that they were being eavesdropped. Serene, pretending that she had not heard anything, calmly approached them to ask her question.